Welcome to another episode of Before You Kill Yourself with your host, Leo Flowers. I am Leo Flowers. Today, joining me is Rachel Moore LMFT. That's right. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist with an undergraduate degree in creative writing. She was a news copy editor for 14 years, mostly at the San Diego Union Tribune. In 2010, she switched careers and went back to school to get her master's degree in marriage and family therapy. She's trained in EMDR, and her practice focuses mostly on helping creative people, writers, artists, musicians. She regularly facilitates a 12-week group on the book The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Welcome, Rachel Moore.
Thank you so much. By the way, I have a funny story about LMFT. Do you want to hear it?
I do. I want to hear anything.
Okay. So I got this shirt online and it's super cute because on the front it says, it's a t-shirt and it says A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, F, T, right? I'm like, that's adorable.
That's
I got the shirt. I love the shirt.
Yes.
It's adorable. Well, there's something on the back and I didn't know about this. On the back of the shirt, it says something to the effect of, I help couples talk to me. And I'm like, oh no, because number one, not only do I don't specialize in working with couples, I work with individuals mostly. The other thing is like when I'm out in the world, like wearing my shirts and doing my thing, like I'm sorry, but I'm off duty, right? I don't necessarily want strangers coming up to me and asking how to help with their relationships. So I only wear that shirt at home.
But I would love to know how many people would come up to you. Have you worn it out in public?
Right? That would be so interesting. You're right. That would be a good experiment. Maybe I should take a little performance art on that.
Yeah, because like when I go hiking, sometimes I'll see, a personal trainer with a t-shirt and on the back it says trainer on the back.
Right.
And because they're training somebody. But like if you were just like in Whole Foods or at the farmer's market at a football game, totally. With people be like, hey, in between innings, can you help me and my wife? I would now it makes me want to get a shirt that says like therapist, coach, whatever, just something on to see if people would say something.
Yeah. I think you should. I think you should try it out. You can take that idea.
So you specialize in EMDR. First of all,
yes.
the Artist's Way. I'm backtracking a little bit. I do morning pages. I've started doing morning pages every day. I've been intermittent with it, but definitely valuable in that it's not necessarily what I write. It's the clarity that I get from writing. If that makes sense. So what I write is gibberish, right? Sometimes it's the same word over and over again. I'm jumping from topic to topic. There's no grammatical. It's gibberish. However, when I take a break from the writing and walk around and do other things and kind of unplug from it, I notice that my thoughts are clearer, more objective. I get insights into things, but it's almost like the morning page is like a way of taking out the trash.
Exactly.
Can you talk to us about the morning pages a little bit? And
sure,
because so many people journal and struggle with that.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. At least from the perspective of the book, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, she talked about how, the morning pages are a place to write that gibberish, to not worry about grammar and spelling and even handwriting. I can hardly read half of mine. And to get all of that stuff in your brain out kind of before you start your day. So it just unclogs, right? And it doesn't interfere. That's the first thing. And then like you're saying, that's great that you also find yourself getting insights from that. The other thing I would say is I like how she says, sometimes when people are feeling cranky, they don't want to write their morning pages, when in actuality, they feel cranky because they haven't written their morning pages, right? So I think that, it's just a great way of kind of having some time with yourself, almost like a little meditation, I think. Yeah, that's cool that you do that.
So how did you go from creative writer and editor to a licensed marriage and family therapist, what was that aha moment for you?
Well, a couple of things. And by the way, to me, being a journalist and being a therapist, like pretty much feel like the same thing. As far as my temperament goes, it's like I love talking to people individually. I love learning about people. I love learning about things. I love getting the story right and kind of compiling it and putting it together and making sense of it. Like to me, that's writing and that's therapy. Same things. So what happened for me is I think that when I first started out, I remember when I had my very first therapist when I was in my early 20s, him looking at me one day, and I did write to him after I became a therapist, him looking at me one day and saying, how did you not get into this field? Like, he's like, he saw some natural gifts there, which was nice. But I was an editor for a long time until the newspaper industry was tanking, as it has, and it was being decimated. And so it wasn't the job I was doing at the time in 2010 wasn't really the job that I had started doing, if that makes sense. And then also, I kind of felt like I had done what I wanted to do in newspapers, you know. The biggest catalyst was that I had gotten married about a year before, and I worked swing shift. So I worked weekends, holidays, usually like 3 p.m. to midnight. So in a way, I kind of had a long distance relationship with my husband because, you know, I'd come home from work at midnight, he'd be asleep, and he'd leave in the morning, I'd still be sleeping. So we wouldn't see each other for days on end. And he said, you know, I thought it would be okay, but it's not okay. And I totally understood that. So yeah, those were kind of all the factors. But going into my career as a human being or whatever, as a working person, I kind of could have gone either direction, I think, either through, you know, being a journalist or being a therapist. I am glad I waited to be a therapist because I got a lot of life experience, which for me in particular, other people may be different. For me in particular, was very important basis.
You know, what I love that you highlighted was that you were able to break down the parts of being a journalist and
Mhm.
realizing that you can transfer that over to being a therapist, right? Because you talked about
Totally.
how you love learning about people and writing and you know, just that natural kind of curiosity, and how you could
Mhm.
exemplify those same tenets in therapy. And I think it's beautiful to highlight because a lot of people are either losing their jobs or they're transitioning from one job to the
Mm.
next, and that job
Mhm.
becomes their identity, right? Like if you had
Right.
just
Yeah.
identified as being a journalist, it would have been hard for you to make that transition. Is that something that you have always been able to do? Is that something that you learned to do?
It was hard. I will say, yeah, it was. I still consider myself a journalist in many ways. That is very much a like kind of a fellowship. I think in the same way, and I have always kind of been that person that, you know, my dad would say to me, for example, you know, he's like, well, sometimes people have a job so they can do their life outside of their job, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. My job is me, so I got to say that I do identify with the work that I do, and that's okay. Interestingly, it has caused me to do work that is not so great paying. I mean, especially as a journalist, right? You don't get paid a lot of money, but for me, I need my work to be fun and I need to be meaningful. So it wasn't necessarily an easy transition. In fact, it was pretty difficult. And yet, it's just like that. I don't know if everybody feels this way, but that moment when I knew it was time, it was just time to evolve, you know. And growing can be painful.
You said it was is difficult. What was the difficult part about the transition for you? Was it more mental? Was it
Yeah.
just more practical? Was it financial?
Emotional, definitely emotional, because when you, especially when you work those weird hours, you get really close to your coworkers. You become kind of like a family. And at every place I worked, gosh, I'm even feeling emotional talking about it right now. At every place I worked, my coworkers felt like my family. Um, and so whenever you would leave, it would be like saying goodbye to your family. And all of the, to be honest, like even all of the sort of guilt feelings and, you know, and stuff that goes along with that. So yeah, it's a different kind of world, I think, than most other jobs, I guess.
Yeah, because you spend all this time with other people and you have these inside jokes and you have a routine
Yep.
and rituals and you know what your weekend's gonna look like, so to speak, and holidays and
Mhm.
birthdays. And then did you change locations also to become a therapist, or were you able to stay in the same area?
No. I was able to stay. So that was good. And I do still have some friends from the San Diego paper. I have friends from when I worked up in LA. I have friends from when I worked up in Idaho where I grew up. So like, yeah, it's we kind of, like I said, it definitely feels like a fellowship, and it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Can you tell me more about the guilt? Because that's something I hadn't really thought about in terms of
Yeah.
going. Did you feel like you were abandoning them, or where was
Well,
the guilt come from?
Kinda. I remember when I moved from the LA area, Los Angeles area to San Diego, I remember literally, saying goodbye to everybody and telling them like, yeah, I want you to know you're my family. Like I really feel that way. And one of my coworkers was like, oh, so you're abandoning your family? And I know she was joking, but like, yeah, that's like it's almost like we know that we're in a low paying job. We know we're getting treated poorly, but we're all in it together. Maybe it's sort of like, I don't know because I don't know anything about the military, but maybe it's sort of like that feeling of like the band of brothers and sisters. It's like, yeah, why are you leaving us? Like, we're in this together, in the trenches together. It's so funny just talking about it because it's not like a huge deal, but again, it's probably different than most normal jobs. I feel like, in my life, I have had a 9 to 5 job for like a total of a year. So for me, like, it's so interesting we're talking about career stuff, but like for me, um, yeah, it's just a different way of being, I guess, than if you were in an office job and you didn't really talk to people and then you just kind of leave and nobody cared. I don't know.
It's so funny because I don't even like it when my girlfriend leaves the house before I do.
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel abandoned. She's like, "I'm leaving," and I'm like, "What? What did I do?" She's like,
What?
"No, I'm going to the store." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "Don't say it like that. Just say I'm going to the
Right.
store. Don't say I'm
I'm
leaving."
done.
Jesus, give me a heart attack. My dad wasn't around. What are you doing?
I was just thinking about attachment when you were saying that. Yeah, yeah. I
W-
was just go ahead, yeah.
No, go ahead. What were you
Oh,
thinking?
well, because I was just at home. So right before our interview today, I finished with my morning clients and then I worked out in my office and then I had a half an hour. And I live very close to my office. So I walked home and my husband's still working from home because of the pandemic. And I came in and I was like, hey, how's it going? I was like, I don't have a lot of time. And I jumped in the shower and then I came out and he was just staring at me and I'm like, are you okay? And he was like, well, when you said you didn't have a lot of time, I thought maybe you hate me. And I was like, oh, hon, sometimes those attachments. I'm so glad he told me, by the way, because we could talk about it. And I know that's a part of him. That's not, obviously he knows I don't hate him, but there's this part of him, these younger parts of us, right, that feel sad when people leave or when people say they don't have time for us or, yeah, that stuff's still real. And I will say, as you probably know, like those things, those parts of us in ourselves have no concept of time. So like that part of, I'll use myself, that part of me that's like 5 years old and had a certain experience, it doesn't matter that it's been more than 40 years since that happened. In my brain, it can feel like it happened. I mean, that's trauma. And that's kind of what I do in my work is deal with those types of things.
Wow. All right. I definitely want to dive into that part, but we got to peel
Yeah.
back the layer on the evolution of your husband to say it out loud. I thought that
Yeah,
you
right?
hate me because that's
Yeah.
something I would have just swallowed, let the cancer
Oh,
develop the brain
oh,
tumor and just died. And it'd be
yeah.
like, oh, he had a good run. But, not knowing it all stemmed from me just swallowing an emotion
Mm,
of you coming home,
mm,
taking a shower, and then getting ready to leave.
mhm,
Have
mhm.
Is he a therapist also, or have you guys had to work up to that
He's
level of vulnerability?
He's been married for 12 years to a therapist, so yeah, he's caught on to some things. No, he works in IT. He's a computer dude, and he has done a lot of work. Yes, and I'm so happy, that he has. So yeah, he's worked up to that. We both have together. We've done, couples therapy. Are you familiar with EFT, emotionally focused therapy for couples?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
But for
good
the
stuff, huh?
listeners,
Talking about attachment.
yeah, can
Yeah,
you illuminate that just
yeah,
a little bit for the listeners? EFT.
sure. Not an expert, only been a client, so I don't know so much of the inside of it. But the idea is that there's, the way I understand it, there's all these things that happen on the surface, right? Like my husband could have chosen lots of different ways to respond, like you said. And by the way, I know it was maybe kind of a joke when you said, "Oh, I just swallow it and let the cancer develop." Well, we don't know exactly, but there's theories that people do get sick, as you probably know, from withholding their emotions and things. He could have like snapped at me for some reason that didn't make any sense, right? And so there's these things that happen on the surface when we're not honest with how we feel emotionally. Um, and sometimes a lot of therapy deals with just those surface things. Well, EFT, emotionally focused therapy, really wants to get down to, okay, what is the emotion you're feeling right now? Are you feeling scared? Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling desire, right? Could be a positive emotion too, that sometimes comes out maybe as guilt or shame. So I really, really like it for that. Like it really goes straight into what's actually going on here. That's exciting for me as a therapist and a person. I try to bring that to my work too. It's like, okay, here's all the stuff that's happening. I don't know how to explain it better than just happening on the surface. Let's look underneath that, right? Let's, again, like you said, to use your phrase from earlier, let's peel back those layers and really get to the heart of what's happening. Because I think when we do that, then we can make change. Then we can heal, right? Because we could sit and talk about, oh, so and so, we had this argument about this and that and the other thing. We can talk about that all day and nothing ever shifts, right?
Oh yeah, I thought you were saying it
Mm-hmm.
rhetorically. I thought you were gonna like write and then go into a thing. Then I was like, oh,
I know.
that was
I
a
thought
half
so too.
second too long.
I thought so too for a moment. I'm like, do I have more to say? And I'm like, no, I don't think I do. I think that's it. Like, why would we do that, right? Why would we sit and talk about
Yeah,
this?
I thought the silence was, that you hating me. I was like, oh my gosh, she hates the podcast,
Oh
hates
gosh.
this time, and this is over.
Oh no.
So please talk to
Why,
us
yeah.
about, you said when we're 9 years old, that 9-year-old part of us
Mm,
has no concept of time, and that's part of the work you
mm.
do with
Yeah.
EMDR. Can you talk to us
Yeah.
about that and the effect? First of
Yes.
all, what EMDR is, and then how it's used.
Yes, for sure. So, okay, EMDR stands for I wish we had better terms for all these things that actually made more sense. But anyway, it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So, literally, eye movements. Do we use eye movements? Yes, or any other type of what we call bilateral stimulation. Could be tapping left and right, could be sounds going left and right, just, sparking the left and the right side of the brain back and forth. Eye movement desensitization. That means bringing down the distress of a memory. So yeah, if you're a kid and you have a traumatic memory, we just want to bring down the extra distress. You won't forget the memory. You will kind of look at it like anybody would look at it. Maybe you feel sad. Maybe you wish it hadn't happened, but it doesn't spark, doesn't trigger you in the present as if it's happening right now. And then the reprocessing part is like, there are good things to take from all of our experiences in life, right? So, around this traumatic experience, what's a positive belief that you want to have about yourself? Let's install that. Maybe it's like, I did the best I could, or I am safe now, things like that. And then what's cool, I think, about EMDR is that we also pay attention to the body because I remember kind of being blown away when I learned that emotions actually occur in the body first. Then maybe we have an emotion, and then maybe we have a thought about that emotion. It's not the other way around. So I'll ask, like, okay, when you think of this memory and this positive statement, what do you notice in your body? when we do all these steps, we do, like I said, visually eye movements. I work with people online, and so I have a program where a ball goes back and forth, and people, think about the issue, watch the ball go back and forth. The brain, they think that it's similar to when we're in REM sleep and our eyes are moving back and forth. It might be, nobody knows how it works, but we've got some theories. It might be that the brain is sort of processing memories, like, okay, what did I have for lunch today? I could probably put that in long-term storage, right? But when trauma happens, and it can be big trauma, little trauma, when trauma happens, it interrupts that process. So that it's almost like the trauma is just like bouncing around, like not really knowing where to go, and it doesn't get filed away, and it's kind of gone rogue or whatever. And so we just try to replicate how the brain naturally heals itself. One more thing I'll say about that is that it's kind of like how the body heals itself. Like, if you break a bone, you want to set it back into place where you want it, and then you just let the body, you put a cast on it, you don't touch it, you let the body do the work. It's the same with the brain. We set the conditions for the brain to heal, and the brain wants to heal, and most times if the conditions are right, it will, and it's super fun and exciting, and I love it.
That was such a great explanation of EMDR. I've never heard it explained like that, to reset it and then just let the body do what it does.
Just let it go.
Let it go. And so, you talked about the eyes moving back and forth. I know that it kind of mimics when we're walking, how we're kind of scanning back and forth. So, so this is kind of more of a stationary thing, right? Because you're in an office and you're following this ball back and forth. So I would assume that, I find that when I walk without my headphones on, that my mind is able to work through things that come up for me, that if I was just sitting like on the couch watching TV or like laying in bed, just kind of in a more static state, I'd be stuck there emotionally and even thought wise. I'd just be kind of obsessing over this one thing. Can you talk to us about that and that link, why the EMDR and its link to the eyes going back and forth?
Yeah, like I said, like any sort of, like we call the bilateral stimulation, so the back and forth, movement can really help process things. I remember in my EMDR training, one of the trainers talking about when they were doing early studies on vets, on military vets, and they kind of had a hard time because even the vets walking, like from the van to the office, like their back and forth walking sort of changed their, like it helped them, and they had trouble with the study because they're like, no, we got to keep it, we got to keep it. I don't know, clean is a weird word, but anyway, it affected the study results, just them walking. It does make a difference, and I think that along with all the other things that exercise does for us, right? Too, like I was reading the other day that strenuous exercise actually kind of, it puts us out of our prefrontal cortex. So our worrying mind, frankly, the logical part of us that is really helpful a lot of times, and is really not helpful other times. And so, doing that strenuous exercise can get you more into your body where I don't know, it's just, again, there's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that I don't know about the brain. And we just kind of try and do what works. I did want to say a quick note about, we were talking about the younger parts. And so sometimes when I am doing EMDR with people, sometimes they will get stuck, or, what I perceive as, I think they might be stuck right now. And sometimes a reason is because a younger part, like let's say it is that 9-year-old part, a younger part wants to stop the process because it wants to protect us. So for example, a good example I think of this happening sometimes is when we have that feeling of like, oh, that's no big deal, that's not important, right? We would call that minimizing in my business. But, sometimes a younger part of us will deny that we have any pain because of fear that it feels too painful to reveal it. And so I'll actually work with that part. We have, it takes because I work with artists, it's kind of nice that generally speaking, they kind of have open minds and are willing to sort of try whatever we need to try out. Because it's kind of hard to explain how we have these younger parts of us. But when we do that, I'll say, like, what does that younger part feel? What does it need? What do you, the adult, what does your adult part want to say to that younger part that might be helpful? And in that way, it's like we can establish a relationship with these younger parts of ourselves. We can let them know that there is an adult in charge now, because they don't know that. Like I said, there's no concept of time. So they don't know that you've even grown up. There's an adult in charge now who has all of our parts' best interests in mind, and it's going to be okay. So that's a pretty exciting aspect of the work too.
Yeah, in therapy, I remember I had a therapist who had me write with my non-dominant hand, and I guess that was a way of bilateral processing or stimulation. I mean, one is you have to focus so intently because you're using your non-dominant hand, and two, she said the non-dominant side is like the 9-year-old version of ourself, and it's interesting to journal, freestyle journal with your dominant hand, for maybe a few minutes, and then switch over to your non-dominant. And the voice is not only is your handwriting like that of a 9-year-old, but the voice and the thoughts and the fears and the worries, all of a sudden I want a PB&J and, kind of thing. So that bilateral thing is interesting. I think that's why yoga, people cry so much, because you're constantly working one side of the body and then working on the next.
Yeah, I think that I would bet that the dominant hand, non-dominant hand, I bet that that's just like literally different parts of the brain, comes from different parts of the brain. It's fascinating. Yeah.
And so you work with creatives. Why so specific? Why the niche? I know you have the creative writing background, but what's their what are their how are their challenges different than another population?
Well, for one thing, I love them. I am a creative person, and I love creative people. I also sing, play music, and played piano, and I used to play saxophone and drums in school. And it's such an important part of my life. And for me, I would want to go to understood what it's like to be creative. And it's interesting, part of the reason that I was drawn to talking with you on your podcast in particular is that for me, and I think for a lot of people, oftentimes, art and creativity can feel like a life or death prospect. For me, it is what makes life meaningful, period. As well as, connections with people I care about and things like that. Aside from that, art and creativity, like that's what makes, I don't even know how to express it, And so it's that kind of je ne sais quoi thing that I think I share with a lot of other creative people that is really helpful in therapy, because like, I get it. If somebody tells me, how important writing or drawing or music or art or whatever it is, how important that is to them, I totally get it. 100%. I'm completely on board. Also, like from my perspective, I tell this story that, one time I was explaining to my therapist, who's not a creative person, which is fine. This is, not all of us are, no big deal. And yet it felt a little frustrating, because I was trying to explain to her this experience of sitting down at my friend's digital piano, and piano's like, to me, playing the piano is such an emotional experience. It's like the one thing in life I can count on to help me calm down, to help my parasympathetic nervous system get online. And I was explaining sitting at this digital piano, and it felt like a real piano, and just the sensations and what that meant to me. And it's like she was listening, of course, because she's a therapist, and she kind of got it, but she didn't really get it, And I was like, wouldn't it be cool to have a therapist who gets it in that way? So I don't know if that explains it. I haven't ever really found a wonderful way to explain it, other than I just kind of feel like my brain works that way. And I love talking with people whose brains work that way too. And I think it's just, in a very practical way, it saves a lot of time. And I think it's nice to have that kind of empathy with my clients. And I just really love working with them.
As I was thinking about the EMDR and looking left to right and helping it
Mhm.
move through the body, it kind of seems to me like it's a way of you think about the ebb and flow of a river, right? And
Mhm.
so it's how it cleanses itself. It brings
Yeah.
water in, it brings it out. And so looking side to side, we're kind of ebbing and flowing somehow and physiologically,
Mhm.
as opposed to like a swamp. And that's the power of walking or exercising outside,
Yeah.
is that your body is moving side to side, your eyes moving side
Yep.
to side. Where in your house, when you're sitting on a couch, everything is stagnant, everything is unilateral.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
you just become this swamp over time. And I think that's the damage of sitting. It's not just the physical and sciatica, which I have,
Mhm.
but the
Oh, that's hard.
psychological and the emotional aspects of moving things around.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. And I think, it occurs to me too that, and I, think about this sometimes, EMDR, like it's rhythmic too. It totally makes sense to do this with creative people. And it's like back and forth and back and forth. And sometimes I do feel like a conductor, because it's like we have the technical parts of doing EMDR. And then, like I said, when people get stuck, it's like that's when the art comes in, right? It's like, okay, how do I help this person? How can I creatively figure out from what I know about them already? How can we creatively move through this and help them, come to the other side? Sometimes, for example, this maybe sounds so funny, but sometimes it really helps to say, like, okay, again, with these parts, like, how old were you when that trauma happened? The person might say, oh, I was 7 or 8. And then I say, okay, how old are you now? Like, oh, I'm like 32 years old. I'm like, okay, great. And then we do the eye movements. And then sometimes, most of the time they get unstuck. It's fascinating. But anyway, I feel like I'm kind of going on and on about it, but it's good stuff.
No, this, you have a passion for this, and that's what's
Yeah.
exciting because so many people, like EMDR, I think, there's so many people who started practicing in like 2008, but it's still relatively new to,
Mhm.
the culture. And so when people hear enough, like everybody's talking about psychedelics now and psilocybin and
Right.
mushrooms and,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera,
Hmm.
then more people start to incorporate it and realize the usefulness. If they
Yeah.
can't get to a EMDR trained therapist, at least walking. I guess walking is the poor man's EMDR. Uh,
It could be, yeah.
uh, but that's, and so you talked about the piano, because I find that when
Yeah.
I play the guitar, it's so soothing, and I never thought about
Hmm.
it as a form of EMDR, because it does require that bilateral movement, as does
Hmm.
learning how to play the piano. Are there other forms? You talked about tapping, you talked about music, we talked about writing. Are
Hmm.
there other ways of stimulating the bilateral sensations that you incorporate?
Sure. And I feel, compelled to say, of course, that actual EMDR, you should definitely find a trained and licensed person to do that with, just because it can, at the end of sessions, I make sure that people are put back together, so to speak. It's like I'm trained and, we open up stuff, and especially if you're talking about trauma. And so I kind of make sure that people are okay. And I'm also available, for my clients if they need help between sessions too. And I think that's important. So as far as like other, like I said, sometimes with people we've used tones, like so we put on headphones and sounds back and forth. I think that any sort of like, right when you're listening to music, especially in headphones and to stereo music, any sort of like left and right things going on can be really helpful. Also, there's I can send you a link on this if you want to post it too. There's a thing called a butterfly hug. Um, that has to do with tapping back and forth right underneath your collarbones. And that kind of helps
Oh
calm
yeah,
folks down
send it
too
to
if
me
they
for
want to.
sure.
Yeah, if they want to do that on their own. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love that. I love that kind of stuff. The
Mm-hmm.
back and forth, side to side. I remember I
Mm-hmm.
was in distress in Vegas, just going through
Mm-hmm.
some. I don't know what I was going through, but I put my right hand in a bucket of ice, and
Mm-hmm.
immediately started to calm down. But then in my
Mm-hmm.
left hand, I had hot tea, and so
Right.
I just needed those extreme temps at the same time. And
Mm-hmm.
I can't explain why it was soothing, but it's all taps in. I'm so fascinated by this, and I think this is why swimming is such a great form of
Yep.
exercise because it taps into that bilateral,
Yep.
um, you know, and and
There's
also
something.
walking
Yeah.
with your
Yeah. Go
partner
ahead.
too.
Mm.
It's more soothing to if you're gonna have that conversation. If you like, we need to talk
Mm-hmm.
to do it walking and not on a couch or facing each other like
Right.
you're at a disposition or deposition, yeah, deposition.
Yeah. 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 Right. Right. Interrogation. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's something about our brains that, like, our brains like to be balanced, and I think that that's a really nice way to balance them out. And yeah, I listened to your podcast about that in Vegas when you had the hot and the cold. And I think anytime a person is feeling overwhelmed, whether sort of anxious or depressed or whatever, it does help to really get into the body. And that's a great way of doing it, because getting into the body, like you said, by those extreme temperatures, for example, it can be smells, it can be even like soft fabric things or whatever textures. It really helps a person stay in the present moment, or be in the present moment. And there's that phrase, I never know quite how I feel about it, and I can't remember exactly who said it, but like, in the present moment, we are all okay. I think that can be true and not true, but generally speaking, it does feel a little better I think, to be in the present rather than to be either ruminating about the past or fearing about the future, right? And being in the body again brings you right into that present moment. So that's so cool that you did that and that it was helpful.
Yeah, oh yeah, I love that you brought up smells because especially with
Mm-hmm.
the quarantine, a lot of people losing their sense of smell,
Oh yeah.
and I think that people don't realize how much olfactory senses play into our mental health.
Yep.
Being able to smell. I know, like if I have one nostril clogged up, I just kind of feel uh, a little off kilter, off center, than when I'm able to breathe off out of both nostrils. Um,
Yeah. It changes how food tastes. Even sex is different, without a sense of smell. I can't imagine. It's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of things. And not to mention memory, you know. I mean, it's an interesting thought to think about how scent, triggers our memory so much. And that if you didn't have that, like, maybe your memories wouldn't be as strong. I don't know. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I started doing alternate nostril breathing.
Uh-huh.
Dr. Andrew Huberman talked about that, and I didn't realize that that was a way of like kind of stimulating like the bilateral senses. Also, are
Yep.
you familiar with the alternate nostril breathing?
I am. What is that? Noti Shodan or something like that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I forget his name. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the Sanskrit word for it, I think. But like, yeah, I don't like it. It makes me really anxious. It's, there are different things that are helpful for different people. And that one, I'm just like, no, no, I can't do it.
Oh, that's so true, and I think that's an important thing to highlight is because I think a lot of people like they Google something, they try it, and they go, it doesn't
Yeah.
work, and then they give up on everything. They never seek help
Right.
again, and it's really about
Right.
finding the modality that works for you. I had a
Yeah.
friend who was always getting in trouble in school, and then his parents sent him away to like this camp where like it was more
Hmm.
like an outdoor school program, and he excelled. He
Right.
became leader, became a doctor, but it's just that environment didn't work for him being in a school sitting behind a desk.
Right.
So it's about finding a modality that where you can thrive.
Yeah, and I think that's important to mention too in the context of finding a therapist or a therapy that works for you, right? Like, we like to tell people, like, interview therapists. Like most of us have, free consultations where you can actually talk with the person and see if there's a good vibe, see what their approach is like. And yeah, not all therapists are the same. I can tell you that 100%. And some of us, just as like not all people are the same. We have different skills, we have different interests. So, yeah, I think that's important to think about as far as like getting therapy or any other type of life coaching or whatever, whatever it is that you want to do to try to improve yourself or heal or whatever. Not all the same.
It sounds like, because you talked about when people come in to see you and the importance of really going to see a therapist, is that, we're going to kind of peel back some layers and, you're going to bring up some experiences for you, but we're also going to put you back together again. We're going to reset you. So I imagine it requires also a lot of visualization. Can you talk to us about that and how that's incorporated?
Oh, I'm curious actually. Tell me more about what you mean with the visualization.
Well, I imagine if we're at, if you're saying to someone, what was your experience like?
Oh, yeah.
Excuse me. Like when you were 9 years old,
Mhm.
or what age did that trauma happen, that they kind of have to, think about that age.
Right.
And I'm assuming that you're not going, all right, what age did that happen? Okay, look left, look right, look left, look right,
Exactly.
and then we're done.
Exactly.
So when you're talking them through it, what does
Mhm.
that sound like?
That's great. And actually, so this is something to consider too when you're looking for a therapist and stuff like I still use the EMDR manual, every time, even though I've done this like a bunch now for years, I still go by the manual because I think it's important. I think it's important for a person to experience what the studies have been done on. So having said that, I just pulled out my manual and I'll walk you through it a little bit. So we do, I'll say like, okay, what do we want to, what's the memory that we want to talk about? And then I will ask, like you said, what picture represents the worst part of the experience as you think of it now? And so they will tell me like, okay, it was this or that or the other thing. And you're right, that visualization, that picture. Sometimes people don't visualize, because everybody's brain's different. And so I'll just say, as you think of the experience, what's the worst part of it? And then after that, I'll ask, okay, what words go best with that picture that express your negative belief about yourself as you think of it now? And so they're thinking about the past and they're also thinking about the present at the same time. We've got one foot in the past, one foot in the present. And that's important with EMDR. And so they'll say, I feel like maybe I'm not smart. Maybe that's the negative cognition that comes up. And then I'll say, when you bring up that picture, what would you prefer to believe about yourself instead? Maybe I'd like to believe I am intelligent. And then I really like this part of EMDR, which is different sort of from other talk therapies. And that's that we can actually, it's a subjective measure, but we actually measure where people are at with all these things with numbers. So I'll say, okay, when you think of that picture, how true do those words, I'm intelligent, feel to you now on a scale of 1 to 7, where 1 feels completely false, 7 feels completely true? Maybe they'll say like 3 or 4. And we'll say, okay, when you bring up that picture and those negative words, I'm not smart, what emotions do you feel now? Right? Maybe they feel sad or frustrated. Okay, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is no disturbance or neutral, 10 is the highest disturbance you can imagine. How disturbing does the memory feel to you now? Again, 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in the present. They might say like, it's like a 6 or 7. And then the last question before we start the eye movements, I'll say, where do you feel it in your body? A lot of times it's in people's chest, shoulders, throat. I tend to find that people have their favorites, right? Like for me, it's like I hold all my stuff in my shoulders. That's usually where I experience it. And then we do some eye movements, and then I'll just ask them what they're noticing. And I don't really interfere. I don't talk. We don't have conversations. I just let their brain process through this. If they get stuck, I'll help them out. Other than that, I'm just really facilitating, holding space, if you will, for this process to happen. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like.
And so what's the reentry? They're going through
Mhm.
that, they're sitting there, and with your last question being, um, where do you feel it in your body? And then you start the EMDR. What is there gripped after that EMDR. We're like, all
Yeah.
right, time's up. See you
It's
Sunday.
okay, bye. Yeah, there is. I'm literally looking it up. It says, this is a cool part too. It says, the processing we've done may continue after the session. That's a cool thing about EMDR is that your brain will keep working on this stuff without you even realizing what's going on. You may or may not notice new insights, thoughts, memories, or dreams. If so, you can write them down. And then before we do any sort of eye movements, processing, whatever, there's two things that happen. One, I make sure that the client is a good candidate for EMDR. And that usually means like they're able to hold that past and present at the same time perspective. If the person dissociates, meaning kind of like they leave their body too much when talking about trauma, it's kind of hard. It's not recommended to do EMDR. So I screen for that first. And also we do what's called resourcing, which is like creating a safe place in your mind or creating a container in your mind where you can put things away so that you can just like do your regular life stuff without thinking about these things that we bring up in therapy. So it says use your safe place to manage any disturbance that comes up. Remember to use a relaxation technique daily. We can work on this material next time. If necessary, you can call me. And sometimes I also do these things too. Like I'll say like, okay, now look around your space and tell me 3 things that are green, and so people have to literally say like, okay, that plant over there and that picture and this mug. And it's so amazing how even something so simple like that, and I would recommend this to people just in life too, if you find yourself again, sort of feeling overwhelmed, again, to kind of get in the body, like get in the present moment, get in the space around you and notice things. Art is a lot about noticing, and so is, just kind of feeling okay. It just kind of notice where you are, feel where you are, and be grounded. So yeah, I don't know. Does that help answer your question?
Absolutely. I really love that last statement that you said, look around and notice 3 things that are green, because that's exactly what I just did. And I
Nice.
was like, wow, I felt so present.
Yeah.
So it's powerful stuff because we don't realize that book, Body Keeps the Score. A
Yes.
lot of what we're doing, you know, is reaching externally for the pills or the meds or the drugs to kind of
Mhm.
heal and soothe us. But our body is so equipped, like you mentioned earlier, to really
Mhm.
heal itself if we can just set things back into place and then let it do what it do.
Yep. Yep. It's one of those things, that is kind of simple but not easy. It's I don't want to sound too hyperbolic or anything. And I will say that sometimes, I mean, I feel like I see miracles happen every day. It's like somebody will come in and saying they got a distress level of like 8 out of 10 or whatever. We do some reprocessing for a little while, and maybe it's down to like a 1 or a 2 or sometimes 0. It's wild the way the brain works. And I don't want to say too that like, I don't want to imply that like, oh, EMDR is the only thing that's helpful. I mean, I love that you were talking about like, yeah, walking can be similar, give similar experiences. There's so many things we can do that are helpful. And overall, kind of like we're talking about, this whole time here today, it's like having faith in our own ability to heal our own body, for our brain to heal itself. And it really does sometimes, I think, kind of take that leap of faith that like, no, maybe we don't have to look to an outside, like you said, like, medication can be really helpful. And also, I think what we have inside us can be really helpful too, if we only allow it to do that, allow it to exist and really pay attention. Yeah.
I love it. And last 2 questions. One is,
Mhm.
where can everybody find you?
Sure. I'm online at rachelmoorecounseling.com. I'm on like Facebook, Instagram, all those things too.
I
You
love
can find
that.
me there.
And is there a book that you love? It doesn't have to be in a self-help. It could be a fiction
Yeah.
book, nonfiction. Is there a book that you've reread or shared or been given, or that's delighted you? Or
That's such a good question. Gosh, well, two things pop in. One's The Artist's Way, but we already talked about that. And somebody asked this question the other day, and I remember in high school reading Siddhartha. Are you familiar with that book by Hermann Hesse?
I am familiar with it, and I feel like I've read it. Oh, that's gonna eat me up because I don't know if I read it. But what about that book resonated for you?
Well, I think that this is sort of a whole nother can of worms, but I grew up, like I said, kind of early. Like I grew up in Idaho, and it's very monolithic in its culture in a lot of ways. Lots of white people, lots of Mormon people, lots of fundamentalist people. There's nothing wrong with that per se. It's just this is how it was. And in high school, when I picked up Siddhartha and I read about Buddha, because that's what the book is about, it's pretty much about Buddha's journey. And I experienced this very, very, very different way of seeing the world, of experiencing things, of it was an introduction to me. I know I think Herman Hesse is German or British or something, but anyway, it was an introduction to me to sort of a more Eastern style of thought. And for me at that time, it was so important. And it was cool to read something that resonated with me in a way that nothing ever had before. I will say it that way.
I love it. And then last question. I always imagine there's one person listening in who may be on the precipice of wanting to end their life.
Mm-hmm.
Before you kill yourself, what would you say to them, Rachel?
Gosh. Talk to me. It's interesting. I'd never really thought of it this way, but so right now my practice is full. Like I don't have any room to see new clients right now. And I still, I'm feeling emotional. I still offer my schedule on my website. Like if you want to talk to me for 15 minutes, because I want to help you. I want to help you, whoever you are. If you want to talk to me, I want to help you find somebody who can help. I want to help you get resources. I feel like that is important. And a lot of times, unfortunately, like for example, people will try to find a therapist and the therapists don't call back. This happens a lot. You may have heard about this, Leo, but like, I think what happens is that therapists get overwhelmed, especially ones who take insurance. I think they get a lot of inquiries. So, I'm available at those times on my website. So I think that's what I would say. It's like, hey, give me a call.
I love that. I love that. Thank you, Rachel Moore, for joining us. Thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in. Remember, this podcast is not a substitute for you going to get help. Call the 1-800-SUICIDE or 1-800-273-TALK or the million of other numbers and resources listed in all of the show notes. Go to thrivewithleo.com for one-on-one coaching with yours truly. Let's get to tomorrow together. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure.